Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, and today we're going to be diving into the current constructed metagame. Now we're going to be going through 5 decks that I think make up the largest percentage of the current metagame. These are decks you can almost guarantee you're going to play if you set down for a game on Pixelborn or if you go to a local tournament. So make sure that your decks are prepared for these. Now these are not going to be deep dives into these decks. I will be doing those in the future, including some gameplay footage. This is just going to be a very brief kind of summary of each to make sure that we can get all of them into a one video clip. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into those lists. Alright guys, we're back here on Dreamborn.inc for their deck builder. There are lots of deck builders that you can use for this one. I just prefer to use this one because I'm familiar with the site. These are the decks that I have constructed on here, kind of my view of what the metagame is right now. We're going to go through, break down, look at some of the deck choices. Now, a lot of these cards are flexible, and I'll be doing full deck breakdowns in the future, but I want to give you guys kind of a rough idea of the decks you'll run into if you guys are playing in the meta currently. So first one we're going to start out with is Amethyst here. That is the red Amethyst deck. It is more of a late game deck, but we're going to break down some of the card choices and what the deck is looking to do. Cards that are absolute must includes in those decks, though we'll go through those as well. In your 1-drop spot, you're going to see this in pretty much all the decks. These 2/2 for 1/1-drops. This is really just respecting the aggro matchups that you're going to run into. You're going to see these in pretty much every deck that I build. You really don't ever want to find your spot going up against, or yourself in a spot where you're going up against an aggro deck and you're just completely whiffing on your 1-drop to be able to swing back into their early game and slow them down so that you can make it to your last game. Yzma here, that's more of a flavor choice. I'm pretty big on her. I know some people are playing the Cauldron over her. I like her because she's a body on the board that can challenge as well, and she is inkable. Donald Duck here, again, just really respecting that early game. Him being a 2-drop with that 2/3 body really helps just mitigate their 1-drop 2/2s, keeping them from being able to quest willy-nilly. Elsa is kind of your first piece leading into your top game. Now, she's not terrible at 2/3 for 3 to help kind of slow down their early game, but the real big effect here is she allows your late game Elsa to shift on to her. Now, Maleficent is an absolute auto-include in every one of the builds. This is how this deck is able to ramp up into the higher tiers, is because of the draw engine that purple has. Without it, you just run out of cards too fast to realistically get to the late game. So Maleficent is an absolute must-be 4 of in this build. Rafiki, similar. He's our first removal spell that we're going to kind of run into. He is going to help, again, make sure that you can take care of their low-cost attackers and questers to make sure that you make it to that last bit of the game. Definitely must have in this build. Aladdin is a flex card for sure. I like that he can give the 7-drop Aladdin here the ability to come in and be able to challenge that first turn. Again, if you have to have him in a pinch, he is another body too to slow down the early rush. And being inkable, he's never going to be a dead card in your hand. Maui is another must-be-included card in this. He's one of the best removal spells in the game, which may sound confusing if you're more used to traditional removal since he is a character. However, he rushes, which means he can come in and challenge immediately. And with these huge stats at 5, he is usually going to be 2 very good trades. For turn 5, this guy is, again, a must-have 4 of in the deck. His only downside is he can't challenge active characters. That reckless ability can occasionally be abused by your opponent, forcing him to attack an unfavorable attack, but at 6/5 stats, there's really not a ton of those out there. Aladdin, again, is a one that you can take or not take. I've seen some people use the 8-drop Taylor Mickey in this spot instead, which is perfectly fine. I like that he can steal, like legitimately steal, not just make your opponent lose lore, but he takes that lore from them. So it actually can tip the scale if they leave one guy back, and that's going to be the guy that wins. Then the game, you can drop this guy in, hopefully on your other Aladdin, swing in, steal enough lore to where they can't win the next turn, and stabilize from there. Elsa's kind of your big bad in this deck. She comes in, she can tap ready characters, which is, or rest, I guess, ready characters, which is huge. That 3 lore generation will help you go as well. She is a must-have if you're going to be playing this deck, because this is your top end. This is the kind of the card that will stabilize and win the game and prevent your opponent from being able to kind of force that last little bit of lore for you to win in those matchups. Maleficent, if you're ramping to 8, you might as well go ahead and ramp to 9, right? She is a Dragonfire, which we'll get into here in just a second. She just comes in and banishes a character straight out of the gates. 2 lore generations, not bad. Decent sized body, so your opponent's probably not going to be able to challenge her off in a 1-for-1 trade, which is nice as well. Honesty, more often than not, she gets inked because 9 is still a lot, even in this deck, especially since you're not accelerating to it. So a lot of times she's in your ink zone, but if it gets to a battle of top decks in the late game, this one really comes in pretty clutch. Dragonfire kind of speaks for itself. Auto include in the deck, 5 cost, straight up banishes a character, comes in usually fast enough to deal with really problematic characters like their Stitches especially. Hopefully getting it before they have any chance to activate it. Card in pretty much any red deck you see is going to be a 4 of. Our songs here, we've got Friends on the other side is a 4 of. This, again, is your draw engine to help make sure you don't run out of cards, since you need to be inking cards every single turn in this deck. This card is going to help supplement that card disadvantage where your opponent's going to be stopping inking at like probably 4 to 6. You're going to be inking all the way up to 9. And this card's going to help you keep replenishing your hands in order to do that. Be prepared. This is our sweeper. This is kind of our big catch-up card. Your opponent has gone wide. They've been overcommitting to the board. This is going to allow you to kind of clean the house, so to speak, to make way for your singleton big drops like your Elsa, your Aladdin, and your Maleficent up here. Overall, the deck's very consistent because it draws a ton of cards, and very few decks can compete with the late game that this one puts out. Mid-range game has got pretty solid removal on Dragonfire and Maui, and again, just enough to kind of survive that early game rush, slow them down just so they don't have 16 or 17 lore already by the time you stabilize. All right, next one up is Blue Steel. This is the ramp deck centered around Belle and A Whole New World. Similar to the last one, you have our 1-drops here. These are going to make sure, one, that we have something to play on turn 1, but pretty favorable challenges. This hook challenges pretty favorably with 2-drops and even some 3-drops in the game. The Flounder can take care of, again, a lot of the 1-drops there. Grandma Tala, she is your 2-drop that is going to help you ramp if she is banished. Don't forget that you can use her to challenge your opponent to banish yourself and have her go into your banish zone if you need to hit that specific ink for your following turn. Eric is another one that's in here for your early game rush. He challenges pretty favorably as a 3/3 on 2. Mickey Mouse is just in here for ramp. He is an auto include. You must have 4 of them in this deck. I have seen some people play 1 step ahead or 1 jump ahead instead of Grandma Tala. I don't really like it. It's card disadvantageous, which isn't huge for this deck, but you're basically paying 1 card out of hand to go into your resource pile versus her taking 1 off the top of your deck to go into your resource pile. But it does guarantee you get the jump ahead, so to speak, versus Grandma Tala being at the, having to be banished first.
But yeah, Mickey Mouse comes in, takes that top card and puts it there. Belle is kind of a twofold here. She's obviously has a decent win condition with the fact that she is a 5 lore generator when she quests after you get to your threshold, which is really what you're trying to do. But she also allows you to dump your hand. Since we are in Steel, we have access to a whole new world. So having her really allows you just to kind of put everything out of your hand into play and maximize the card advantage that a whole new world can bring. Your opponent's hopefully holding 4 or 5 cards. You've emptied your hand and can replenish it with Belle. Captain Hook, this Hook here is going to be getting back our Fire the Cannons. He has a very solid body as well. So this guy really, really helps hold off the fort for the first part of the game. You're able to trade 1-for-1 with a lot of early game with the Fire the Cannons. He comes in, gets a Fire the Cannons back, and that 3-4 body is actually pretty hard for a lot of the aggro decks to deal with in a 1-for-1 exchange, especially since that Fire the Cannons is probably going to pick off one of the characters you would throw at him in the first place. This guy, I think, is pretty essential. I've seen some lists that do not run him. I would definitely not cut him with as large a portion of the metagame that we have with aggro decks. Speaking of aggro decks, Tinkerbell is kind of your catch-all for those. She comes in at 6, shifts for 4, but we're not actually running the smaller Tinkerbell as I don't think you really need her on 4. The deck gets to 6 pretty quickly, and you're going to be using those first turns to ramp towards 6 anyway, so you don't really want to be playing the smaller Tinkerbell. And she comes in and she hits the entire board for 1, killing a lot of aggro cards, like Lilo especially. And then she's going to be able to challenge the following turn with a 4/5 body, which is pretty respectable, and be able to deal 2 damage to another character if she's able to banish something, which she should be able to. Being able to play these back-to-back turns as well is never a bad thing either. This card is basically a 4 of in any Steel deck. I can't imagine why you wouldn't want that in your Steel top end. And then speaking of top end, we kind of top out in the character side with Hades, 7-drop, uninkable. He has 3/6 body, not anything to write home about in the 7 spot, but 2 lore generation with the ability to banish a character when he comes into play. This is basically your removal for their top end characters. He takes care of anything, their Elsas, their Maleficents. No matter how big the character is, he can come in, put a decent enough body on the board, and then exile the biggest threat on, or banish, the biggest threat on the board as well. We get into our actions. We have 4, develop your brain. This card, early game, is going to be going to your Inkwell, but late game can really help with the top deck race. If you top deck this card, it basically, for the cost of 1 ink, is going to give you the option of the best 2 cards on the top of your deck. Should hopefully help get you there. More often than not, though, like I said, early game, you just put this in the Inkwell. I don't like playing this on turn 1. I'd much rather put a body down on turn 1 to help stabilize early game. Fire the Cannons is a huge tempo piece for this deck. It is going to help keep the board clear until you can get to some of your sweep effects or to your late game removal. Same with Smash, only larger. This one is inkable too, which is nice. 3 damage takes care of a lot of the characters that are getting played right now. The fact that it's inkable, it will never be a dead card either. Similar here with our first song, which is Let It Go. It is a straight up banish card. Now what is nice too is there are a few decks out there that are running recursion type effects. Hades and Let It Go both put the character in the ink zone. Yes, it is ramping your opponent's ink well, but it does keep them from being able to pull those characters back with cards that return them, such as like Hades or Part of Your World. So a nice bonus in some situations. But this being a song and singable banishes, again, their biggest threat, kind of helps bridge that gap until you get to your Hades. Very nice card here. Now, Whole New World, auto-include in this deck as well. This is definitely the best way to utilize a Whole New World. You are, again, putting all your hand down faster than any other deck is going to. You're going to be inking things that normally you would not be inking because you're going to be able to refresh your whole hand when this comes down. Now, I will say if your opponent figures out what you're doing, they will start to play things card disadvantageously as well to make sure that they can take a maximum effect of the draw. So just keep that in mind. You may be able to play that to your advantage as well. Then grab your swords is another auto include for this deck as a 5 of. You can cut this if your individual metagame isn't super aggressive. However, a lot of people are playing aggro decks right now. This card you don't want to stop seeing in those matchups. Very commonly like a 3-for-1, if not more. Just an insane value, even though it's not inkable. You're probably never going to not want to play it anyways because of the fact that it is a one-sided effect and such a powerful effect at that. Take us to our next deck, one of our first aggro decks on the list here. This is Amber Emerald build. We've got, starting this out with Lilo down here. She's a 1 uninkable 2 lore generator. Now, she is very good at what she's done. I've talked about this card a number of times on the channel. She is kind of a linchpin for this aggro deck because she's a 1-drop that generates 2 lore. That's really all she is good for, but she is very good for that. Auto include in this deck because you need to hit the ground running as fast as possible with lore generators. Stitch, another auto include. He is going to be the linchpin for going into your Rockstar Lich. Again, another 1-drop, those 2/2 stats, 1 lore generation. Duke of Wesselton just happens to be the green 1-drop 2/2. This guy's probably going to get inked most times to play one of these other 1-drops, but if you miss on both of these, this guy still allows you to put a presence into play on turn 1. Your worst 2-drop out of the group for sure is LeFou. He is a 2-drop with 2 lore generation, which is very nice and important in this. Again, we want to try to go as wide as fast as possible, and he is a way to do it. He trades pretty unfavorably as a 1/2 in that 2-drop spot, but hopefully he's going to be behind Simba here, who has that bodyguard ability with that 2/3 body. He is going to be able to protect a lot of these early drops from unfavorable trades, especially your 1-drop Lilo and your 2-drop LeFou. Now, Flynn Rider is definitely an all-star for this deck. Again, we have another 2-drop character with 2 lore generation. He's only a 1/2, and I know you're like, oh, well, LeFou's not that great. Why is Flynn Rider so good? Well, he comes with built-in protection. He's one of the only guys that you can quest with and not really worry too much about it when Simba is not there to protect him as well. Now, your opponent's going to want to get rid of him because he has that 2 lore generation, but he has this awesome ability here. Here comes the Smolder. Whenever a character is challenged, the challenging player chooses and discards a card. Very card advantageous. He's already going to have generated 2 lore if they're challenging him, and now they're going to have to drop a card to even challenge him at that point. No, he's not going to trade real favorably with the card that challenges him, but that's fine. You don't really need them to because they're down that card in their hand. Mickey Mouse here, nothing too fancy about this guy. He's just another 2 lore generator. You really don't want to be playing anything past turn 1, other than maybe like Simba, obviously, that generates less than 2 lore because this deck is all in for lore generation. You don't really have much of a late game. You don't really have answers to the big threats in the game. You've just got to be able to put, 12, 14, 16, lore in the bank there before your opponent starts playing their big stuff. This guy is going to help get you there. I will say more often than not, things above 2, honestly, in this deck are going to be a lot of the things that you're using to get lore down early in the game and then lore up to your 5 drops. So these 3 to 4 drops here, take it with a grain of salt. You could probably switch a lot of these in and out however you feel. Because they're all inkable, a lot of times these are going to be like the foundation cards that kind of get you early game up to your mid game. But 2 lore generation, 3/3 body for 3, not too bad. Rapunzel, another 2 lore generator at 4, 1/5, not great stats to trade with. Now, she obviously is in here for her ability, which allows her to heal and draw cards for that healing. Now, up to this point in time, you don't have a lot of people in there that will be alive through a challenge, possibly Simba if you challenge something and then follow up with a Rapunzel. But she is mostly going to be in here to come after some of these cards that we're going to see here shortly. So just keep that in mind. The counts on her, I've played with as little as 2, played with as many as 4. I think 3 is kind of right where it's at. 2, 3 is probably where I would recommend. But if you really like the effect, or you're in a meta that really likes to deal, damage across the board, then she may be worth bumping up from there. Hans, though, 4-drop, 3 lore generator, the lowest cost 3 lore generator in the game. This guy, again, very solid, 3/3 stats, not going to be trading favorably, but allows you to put a pretty good dent for that early in the game if you can hit him right on curve. Tinkerbell, similarly, she's probably the weakest character that we've reviewed so far. So if you're going to make any changes, or you have a character or some tech that you want to work in, she's probably where I would start at. She has the ability to give somebody else evasive for a challenge, but this deck's not a strong challenging deck. But she is a 2 lore generator with evasive, which can throw some hiccups in there, especially in like your purple deck. Whenever they're trying to tap things down with Elsa and then challenge into them, they can tap her down and keep her tapped down, but they still can't challenge her directly. She does have 3 body, which has her survive the fire of the cannons and the grab your sword, which is also nice. So she's got some built-in protection for this deck, and can be that really hard piece for your opponent to remove whenever you're at your last little bit and counting there. Cusco here, 3 lore generator with ward. That's about the only stats that even matter. But on top of that stat, he's got a 4 willpower, which makes him hard to trade evenly for. And the ability No Touchy, which means when he's banished, he's also going to banish the character that banished him. So if your opponent is swinging in with that big Maui we were talking about earlier, you can just quest with this guy. They can't dragon fire him, so that it's a favorable trade, and it becomes a more reasonable trade with the Maui at that point, especially since you've already gotten the 3 lore. But it also allows you to drop a card. If you're at 17 lore, you play this guy, they basically have no response to it outside of just a be prepared at that point, which is very nice as well. Mad Hatter, one of my favorite cards in this entire deck. Similar stats as Cusco, only his ability allows him that each and every time that he is challenged, you may draw a card. That 4 willpower means he's usually going to take 2 challenges early in the game to get rid of, which means he would draw you 2 cards in addition to the 3 lore. Really like this guy, a big target to shoot for on curve there. Stitch is pretty self-explanatory. He is your draw engine for late in the game. Now, this particular aggro build doesn't capitalize on his draw engine nearly as much as the one we'll look at here in a little bit. So just be careful prioritizing it too much there. Songs, we have To Be Our Guest. This song gets inked more often than not. You don't really want to be playing this on curve. It is kind of nice on like turn 4 to be able to play like a Flynn Rider and play this and see if you can find a Rockstar Stitch or your 5 drops at that point in time. So that's why it's only a 2 of in there. Mother Knows Best. Now, this card is going to be an MVP some games, and in other games, you're going to wonder why you're playing this card at all. However, it is really necessary for a lot of the matchups. If you are down to the nitty-gritty of a late game kind of win for somebody, this is going to allow you to possibly shoot back their tempo card. There's been some times against like the blue steel deck where I use this to bounce their bell on a turn that they were wanting to play A Whole New World. So things like that are really nice. The fact that you can play it for free as a song is also nice in some challenging situations where you can bounce like their bodyguard and swing in to a smaller character. I don't think I could cut any of these copies because it just, when you need it, you need it. Not being inkable obviously is a drawback, but very rarely do I find games where this thing has no application. On our items, I've seen this one go both ways. I've seen them either play Lantern or the card Just in Time. I prefer Lantern because it is going to be a constant effect. Like, it is not as explosive as a turn 3 right on time into a turn 5 bomb, but on your turn 2 and turn 4 to turn whatever, it's going to be more consistent value than that one will be. It allows your Stitch to come down much sooner. It allows your 5 drops to come down on 4, your 4 drops to come down on turn 3, which is huge whenever you're racing your opponent. If you can get to these 3 lore generators a whole turn sooner, it makes it very hard for them to race to cards like Be Prepared, or even, if you're playing that steel deck, for them to be able to passively wait until they have a more advantageous removal. So I really like the Lantern in this build. I like it a lot more than the Just-in-Time, but I have seen some builds that run the Just-in-Time instead. Next one is going to be Ruby Fire. This is another ramp build. We've got similar cards up front, your 1-drops here, again, so that you have some early inkable plays. Donald Duck is another one, again, we mentioned before, trades very favorably to help get you to that late game. Grandma Tala, same effect as in her previous build. She is going to be ramping you to that late game. Aladdin, same as his previous build. You're going to see a lot of similarities between like the 2 other decks, the blue steel and the purple and red ramp deck that we, or not ramp deck, but late game deck that we saw. Very similar kind of merging of the 2 decks. Aladdin is going to be for your big Aladdin there to kind of stave off the early game. Mickey Mouse is your ramp spell. Maui for your big removal. Now Robin Hood is your new addition here. Unlike your Amethyst builds, you don't have the crazy amount of card advantage and card draw that they have. So this Robin Hood is going to help you kind of refill your hand when you're in that late game top decking mode. And then your late game cards are going to be your Aladdin, your Hades, your Maleficent, which you can get to much faster than the purple and red build. So this one's going to get inked less often than it did in the previous build because 9 is much more obtainable in a deck like this. Develop Your Brain and Dragonfire, again, similar roles, going to help your late game top decks, going to be inked early, and this is going to take care of any character that you are not able to take care of with your Hades and Maleficent. And then your 2 songs, your Let It Go and your Be Prepared, similar roles as in your other ramp decks. Now, they're out of the 3 decks that kind of are the merge of this one, this is the one I tend to think is probably the best against an unknown field. I think if you have an idea of what you're playing against within reason, if you know if you're going into a highly aggressive metagame, I think the blue steel is going to be your better option. And I think if you're going into a more mid-range or control, I think your purple and red deck is going to be your better option. But this deck is not terrible against anything. It's got lots and lots and lots of removal. You're ramping there. The problem this deck has, its big weakness, is it doesn't have a draw engine. Robin Hood is pretty much it. You don't really have any way to create card advantage inside of these colors. So that's its biggest weakness, is you're going to want to keep ramping into your late game, and you are going to start to run low on cards, and you're going to be top decking. Now you have some insane top decks in this, and you have a lot of them, so it's not necessarily going to lose even if it goes into top deck mode. But out of the decks that are similar, and we've already shown 2 that are there, I think this is probably, again, the best for a general audience, but if you really know what you're expecting, probably not your best option. And then last, but certainly not least, we've got Amberthest. This is a deck that I probably played more than any of the other ones here. It's just very fast, so you can play quick games pretty easily with it. It's very, very aggressive deck. Lilo, again, 1 lore or 2 lore generator for 1. Stitch is it going to be your 1-drop, with your Archimedes being your other 1-drop for usually, again, getting put down in your inkwell to start facilitating your other plays. Maleficent, we have 4 of her. And, she's just another Lilo copy there. No difference in their value in the deck whatsoever. Olaf as a 1 of is just because I have a copy of a card in here as a 3 of. So I added another 1-drop in here as another trigger for the Rockstar Stitch. Now this deck is much lower costed than the green one because there's no real advantageous reason to go up to the top part of these 2 colors curve for this type of build. So I crammed in as many like 1-drops and 2-drops so you can really just chain the Stitch as often as possible and really eliminated a lot of high-end cards. LeFou, where I talked about him, 2 lore generator for 2. Minnie Mouse, she's another 2-drop, so she triggers here. She's a 2/3, so in like your aggressive mirrors, she helps really stop them from being able to quest as she challenges favorably on all the 1-drops. Simba, again, self-explanatory, and here for that bodyguard ability. Yzma, another 2/2 for 2. Not great stats-wise, but whenever this deck gets into top deck mode, her ability to look at that top card, I really like it. Again, she usually gets inked, but not a terrible card to have in the deck either. We're getting into our 3-drops. I have Maximus at 2. I'll be honest, I could probably cut Maximus entirely. Every time I think I'm going to cut him down to 0, though, like he comes in really clutch for a game in a favorable trade. So more often than not, like you don't want to challenge their characters. But there are some times where he comes in and allows for that favorable trade. Usually after you play Rafiki the turn before, he allows you to come in a turn after and be able to use the Rafiki and maybe still keep him alive after the next trade. Maleficent, self-explanatory. She's your card draw and a 2/2 body with 1 lore generation. Rafiki is about the only removal you have in this deck, coming in with Rush as a 3/3. It's very good in like the mirror aggro matchups because he can come in and crash into their Simba. He survives the encounter. Simba does not, and allows you to challenge whatever Simba was protecting behind it. Rapunzel, we've got her at a 2 here. She's really only going to be good in a handful of situations. And again, if I ended up cutting Maximus, I would probably end up cutting Rapunzel as well, because after Maximus, there's really only like 3 characters right here that she's going to come in and heal for any kind of substantial draw. The fact that she can't trigger Stitch, a lot of times, like I just want to minimize the number of things that are going to stop the chain. Maximus has a 4 of, though. He is a huge bodyguard. He also allows your 1-drops to trade up to a 6 character, so very nice in that regard with his support ability. And so like I said, he's an exclusion. Like he's just good enough that I don't mind that he is a 5-drop in this deck. Then we have Rockstar Stitch. In this particular build, this engine is the bread and butter of this engine. Much more willing to take bad draws to make this happen. If I ready after playing this guy, I have chained as many as 6 cards in one turn, just continually drawing 1-drops and putting them into play and drawing additional ones, which if they don't have a board wipe after that, like they've just lost at that point. Songs, Friends on the Other Side, again, another card draw engine here. Again, you're not going to sing this very often because Maleficent is really the only one that can sing it. Rafiki occasionally will survive long enough to sing it. So more often than not, it's just to kind of help you out of those dead draws. And then we have our items, 3 Lanterns. This is the card I had the 3 of. And again, I don't like it at a 4 of. I consider running it as a 2 of, honestly. And it'd probably be fine if you didn't want to run a full 3 set of these anymore, and you run the risk of getting 3 or 4 of them. 2 is probably fine to get in a game, but that 3rd one is pretty much a dead card because you don't really play any characters over that amount. So that is the breakdown of the metagame as I have seen it so far. There are going to be some outliers other than these decks. Like I said, make sure you guys hit that notifications bell. I will start breaking these down in future videos, going into more detail on those deck lists, showing some sample games as well through Pixelborn. If you guys have any questions, make sure you guys hit me up in the comments section down below. Until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.